Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz. I am thrilled you are here with us today. Our purpose is to share stories, ideas, and tools to help you on your diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. Let's meet this week's guest. Thank you, listeners, for listening to Season 10 of the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm back for a recap of the season, lessons learned, and if I were to look into the crystal ball that I do not have, but if I were to guess the future for diversity, equity, and inclusion, what's on the horizon for 2023, I wanted to share some thoughts that I have of focus areas I'm hearing clients focus on. So we'll get to that. So what did we learn this season? Lots of wonderful guests we spoke to. We talked about intersectionality quite a bit. We had several women of color that shared tools on privilege, inclusive language, how to talk about pay equity in the workplace. And we also talked about the importance of good learning design, women and how they negotiate. We talked about veterans for the first time. So wonderful, wonderful folks that we got to talk with this season. And we are just starting to record season 11, and we'll be back with some amazing thought leaders, experts I've been following in the DEI space. I've got some DEI crushes, if you will, that I'll be talking to, that I will be admittedly sweating while interviewing, likely for season 11. So stay tuned. That will be launching in the spring of 2023. If you have guest ideas or want to be a guest on the podcast, send us a note, julie@nextpivotpoint.com, and any questions you have that I don't get to in this episode or previous episodes, shoot me a note. I'm usually pretty responsive on email. So let's get to it. Predictions for 2023. Well, I think the word of the year that I've already heard that might be unsettling for most, including myself, is uncertainty. Yes, we have the R word looming, that notorious recession. We have so much uncertainty from what's going to happen from a policy perspective on issues that deeply affect reproductive rights, racial issues, LGBTQ issues, as well as education. We're seeing at a state level a pushback on DEI in our education. So lots to watch out for politically and socially. I think from a corporate perspective, the things that I'm hearing most folks focus on are, how do I continue the conversation? You know, what does phase 2 look like? Maybe I've been at this a long time. Maybe I just got into it in the summer of 2020 when we saw a surge. You know, did you know, for example, DEI efforts at organizations saw a pretty big uptick from 2020 to 2021. So it was roughly about 30% of organizations were taking part in DEI work. 2020, this is self-reported. 2021, that went up to about 43%. Then we saw a slight dip. 2022, we went back to 41%. So I think that's interesting. Yes, we're steady. There's not a complete retraction. But this leveling off, this plateauing, I suspect organizations that wanted to do DEI work have probably found their way into the work by now. If they haven't, they might still be wrestling with it. We have a few clients or folks that we've worked with or talked with that, you know, still have a few folks holding out on their senior leadership team that don't see the value in the work. Why talk about personal issues or political issues in the workplace? You know, my response is always, these are human issues. People are not leaving a part of their human selves when they enter the workplace doors, virtually or physically. They never were, and they certainly aren't anymore. Younger workers, too. 80% say that DEI is very or somewhat important. So that's for all folks under 35. That's not just Gen Z, who, by the way, indexes higher than that. If you want to recruit this next generation of top talent and appeal to the emerging consumer base and the community of which you hope to serve, then pivoting and including DEI work is really not a choice. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. So that number is considerably higher than the baby boomer generation and even Gen Xers, about 20% higher. with those that are saying how important it is. So just a thought for the future. If we want to stay relevant, we probably should double down on DEI work. At the same time, the hesitance is happening with economic instability and uncertainty. So those that are investing are continuing to be intentional and consistent, engaging senior leadership will win. And this might be kind of the last stand. When I think of resistance of giving away or even sharing power, we usually see kind of a holdout, but what might feel like a slow trickling of DEI is becoming much more steady. Again, for all the reasons I just told you about the beliefs and the values of younger folks. So what does that mean? What should we do this year? Let me give you a list of 10 things. And you know me, I do not like checklists. I do not like one and done exercises. That's not how DEI works. Please do not mistake me. But I do think a bite-sized approach to DEI, not to oversimplify it. I think we all wish, those that are listening to the podcast, probably your aspiration is everyone cares about this and talking about this seamlessly in their workday. I want to believe in that utopia too, and that's thankfully the world I live in, but that is not the reality for most folks. So how do we seamlessly embed this into a culture with activities? And I'm a huge fan of just this drumbeat. Just keep the drumbeat going on DEI. Please resist the urge to do a one and done massive event or program or unconscious bias training. Those don't work. They usually have a backlash effect because people leave uncertain on what to do or feel like they've been attacked. So stay with it. Stay with that drumbeat. And here's 10 ideas. This is based on my one of my entrepreneur articles I published just last week. And I'll link to that in the show notes if you want to share it with your team. It's got data to back all the stats I've been sharing with you is backed up in the reports with hyperlinks as well. So you can dig in to that article. So idea number 1 was discussing power and privilege. The P word has really been so polarizing. So why not take the air out of the balloon and address the elephant in the room and just talk openly about it? So the way I always frame it, when I introduce the P word, is I actually put the P word on a slide and say, when we talk about power and privilege, here's some things I don't want you to go to in your mind. Doesn't mean you didn't work hard. Doesn't mean you haven't had tough things happen to you. That's called being a human. It means the tough things that happened to you didn't have to do with a part of your identity like race or gender, LGBTQ, age, disability, etc. And if you're looking for activities, we've got a great activity hyperlinked in that article. Just Google privilege activities. Sometimes they're called privilege walks, which I don't like to use because it's an ableist term. Not everyone can walk. And more importantly, we're doing these virtually a lot. So we're not walking. We're actually just kind of noting. And it's not a comparison game. It's not a scoring game. No one wins. It is more of a point of awareness and consideration and using that as how can I be a better ally? How can I be more inclusive with folks that are different from me? So that's one idea, talk about privilege. Second idea is broaden diversity beyond race and gender. There are so many layers to our identities. Neurodiversity is a huge hot topic. I definitely consider talking about that. If you haven't talked about that, that deserves its own conversation because it's got so much depth to it. And talk about it beyond Disability Awareness Month in October. But if you haven't planned stuff for October, that's definitely a meaty topic. But mental health, LGBTQ, disability, age, social class, education, housing, body size. It's a big conversation right now too. So explore other topics. If you've only talked about it from an opticals perspective, please talk about the non-apparent components of diversity because they're much more common. Neurodiversity, again, 15 to 20% of folks worldwide identify as neurodiverse. So I would include that in the conversation if you've not gone there yet. There's a wonderful article my friend Dr. Nika White wrote that I've hyperlinked in the article as well. Number 4, try bite-sized DEI efforts. Again, the drumbeat. I don't want to oversimplify this. People can be offended by the bite-sized approach. I share it because I actually think it's much more realistic for companies that can't afford, not that they can't afford, they're unwilling to invest, I should say, in a massive DEI effort, or maybe they don't have the resources, or maybe they've been adversely affected by the economy as of late. Whatever the reason is, let's not make excuses for it. There is a plethora of activities. So on our website, on our resources page, if you can't find an activity to do with your team that you can bite size, I would really question that. I would relook. There's wonderful free videos, podcasts, books that are small investment where you can learn and grow together. So it doesn't have to be a massive event. Actually, I think the smaller conversations subtly involved in our day-to-day activities like team meetings, all hands meetings, one-on-ones, great way to use those tools. 5, measure it. If you haven't started measuring it, you don't have baseline. This is where we're seeing the wheels fall off the bus with DEI. If you didn't have a baseline and you just started doing things without any data, you probably started doing the wrong things or maybe didn't do the right things. So anything we do in business, we would measure if it's important. Measure DEI. That's just not representation data. That's important. Only tells one part of the story. It's more of a results. If you want to be more proactive, measure behavior. Perceptions of behavior and inclusion assessment. Most employee engagement surveys have some element of inclusion. My experience has been poor modifying those. I think you need to have a standalone, and we've got a wonderful partner, Spectra, diversity assessments that we use that's scientifically validated. We use with our clients, and it is a very reasonable investment we have found, and it gets that baseline so you know point A to point B. 6, ensure your full leadership team is engaged. You've got a couple fence sitters. You've got a couple arm crossed people. I run into this all the time. Set the expectation. If you want to be a leader here, DEI is part of your job. Be very clear and hold people accountable. If people are unwilling to nudge on that, you have to really question if that person is a fit for our evolving culture. Use inclusive language. Number 7. We're seeing a lot of uptick in this conversation. I just delivered a program this week with a senior leadership team about inclusive language. And, I think people think we're being nitpicky. I had someone, as I was teaching people about not using idioms or American jargon, because most organizations are global or want to appeal to a global base. And we're not clear when we say things like rock star and ninja anyway. But I had a well-intentioned participant say, don't we have bigger fish to fry? And I thought, well, you're just using an idiom right now. And here's the thing, when we proactively manage our language, and language is a huge snapshot of our culture, when we proactively show that we're intentional with our language, it makes us less reactive to microaggressions and bigger acts of discrimination. It can be very harmful and huge risks for organizations. So being proactive as well as reactive to microaggressions, there's a yin and yang effect to those behaviors. So why not be proactive? And what does it take to relearn a word to say instead of guys? Not a lot of work in my head. It takes some practice, and that's why we call it practicing inclusive language. Number 8, intersectionality. If you have not talked about intersectionality, that is a huge conversation, and not just for women of color. But, as we're approaching Black History Month, Women's History Month, Pride Month, Disability Month, Celebrate Inclusion Month, all of these months celebrations are great, but unless we're talking about it from an intersectional lens, we risk like a whiplash effect. You think about a woman of color. February, I'm celebrating my Blackness. March, I'm celebrating my gender. Why can't I celebrate those things at the same time? Because those experiences happen simultaneously. 9, address burnout sooner than later. Yes, DEI folks usually leave their jobs within 2 years. Why? They're not well supported. It doesn't mean we have a mental health crisis in DEI. It means that we are not resourcing, supporting, and empowering folks in DEI work. Give people the resources they need to be successful. Stop asking people to do this on a voluntary basis. That is not how we do anything else important to business. And it doesn't matter if they're passionate about it. They've got a full workload with their day job. Take some of that off for DEI work and pay people for the extra effort. 10, the last one on the list, 2023 magic 8 ball here. Take accountability for toxic behavior. Toxic workplace culture, number 1 reason folks are leaving. Great resignation, career cushioning, quiet quitting, whatever we're calling it. This whole prioritization of the ideal worker, always being on, sending the most emails, being responsive, talking too much. Did I say that? Talking a lot? These are not the behaviors of someone that's practicing inclusion. So stop rewarding that behavior, reward inclusive behavior. And if you have high performers on your team that do it in an exclusionary, non-inclusive way, then that's probably even though you get the results, is the behavior tolerable to get to the results? Because the more we tolerate bad behavior, the more we get bad behavior, and the more we lose really good people, even if that person is quote unquote performing for the organization. So be careful how we measure performance, and looking at performance management closely is a worthwhile exercise. All right, y'all, I promised those 10 things. We'll be back for season 11 in the spring. Till then, stay in touch. Send me questions, guest ideas, julie@nextpivotpoint.com. Thank y'all. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Allies are necessary for positive change. If you are on the journey to becoming an ally, we invite you to participate in our brand new Lead Like an Ally online program, or get a copy of our new book, Allyship in Action, available on Amazon. Both are helpful tools that meet leaders where they're at and help provide tools for professional and personal settings. Head over to nextpivotpoint.com to get started today.